Alright, for this one, I wanted to talk kind of more intimately about what happened to me specifically in my head and what was going on there to such extent that it can be communicated. A lot of things don't make sense and they don't translate well into the English language of words and meanings. They're more feelings, more primal things that were going on within me. And I'd been struggling for a long time. I was in therapy twice a week at that point. I was having obsessive compulsive disorder, but a variant of it. I did not, have to wash my hands. I did not have to do rituals. I did not think things were going to happen to me if I didn't do these things. It was entirely internal in my head. It's like some sort of process broke in my brain to where I would almost play on loop obsessive thoughts and could not stop them. It's like they were thought attacks coming at me. So that most hours of the waking day for a long time, eventually it just broke me. It came to a head one night, and I just broke. I'm not really sure how else to say it, but I had no thoughts. I just started crying and hyperventilating and wasn't really aware of where I was. I didn't know what was happening, and my parents kind of set me up on the couch, and I just cried there for hours, I think. They called my therapist. He gave them some suggestions. Nothing worked. And eventually he said, okay, take her to the emergency room. This is not right. So they did. And they asked me if I would go for evaluation at a psychiatric hospital. They said it would take about 2 or 3 days. And in my kind of Valium mind at that point, I was like, yeah, 2, 3 days, whatever, that's fine. It's gonna help. And as I mentioned before, it was actually 2 years. But when I got there, whatever was happening was still very much going on. I got there, they would always wheel new patients in on a stretcher. I don't know why. For the most part, we're fully capable of walking. We're physically fine, but that was just what they did. It was kind of embarrassing. Like, you would come in on the stretcher. I came in the middle of dinner on the unit. So all of these kids are sitting around the table, eating their dinner, and I get wheeled in on the stretcher, and everyone stops, puts their spork down, and looks at me and just watches them wheel me off to the room. It was just so, I don't know, I remember that and being so intimidated just by that alone. But something happened over that night that was the end of a process that had begun with the crying earlier and sort of loss of coherent consecutive thoughts. Something within me withdrew very deep in my mind, and I couldn't break out of it. The best way to describe it might be that I was locked. My presence of mind was locked in this tiny piece, this tiny little box way up in the back of my head, and could not break out, and was watching my life through a window. I could not control what I did, how I acted. If somebody asked me a question, I had no idea if I was going to answer it or not, because it wasn't up to me. Sometimes I would ignore them completely, like I heard nothing. Sometimes I would turn and look at them and say nothing. Other times I would give a coherent answer. Other times I give a ridiculous answer. It was totally out of my hands. It was me responding, and in my mind, where my consciousness was locked up, I could hear the question. I understood the question. I knew perfectly well what I should answer and how I should react and what a normal person would do. And I would put forth this massive will, this massive effort to turn and look at who asked me the question and give the answer I wanted to give. But I wasn't strong enough to do it. It was like trying to grab the reins from something that just cannot be grabbed. So I was helpless. I was a helpless spectator in my own mind. to what was happening around me. To an outsider, I was basically catatonic. I would walk over to the window when I got up in the morning. There was like a kind of like a floor-to-ceiling window, so I could sit cross-legged on the floor and be looking out the window. I would sit there cross-legged and just stare out the window and not respond. I'd have to be led back to the table for meals. But the whole time, I was inside my head, screaming, "Stop it, snap out of this, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Just stop it." But I could not break whatever barrier had walled myself in there. I was just plain stuck. And I don't know for how long that went on. It could have been days, it could have been weeks. I have no concept. I just remember kind of being led to meetings and sitting there and just biding my time really until I could get out. Trying ever so often to mount an effort to overcome whatever was holding me. I couldn't even control like my movements. It wasn't like jerking or anything, that looked uncontrollable, but it's like I would just turn and look at something like very randomly, and I couldn't stop myself from doing it. I would look up a lot. For whatever reason, I would just feel my head starting to go up and look at the ceiling, look into the lights, like some kind of weird moth had possessed me. And I couldn't stop it. The light would hurt my eyes even. I couldn't close my eyes. I couldn't wrench my head back down away from the ceiling. So it was things like that, just very little things outside my control. Someone else had taken over, all the controls and buttons that controlled me and what I did and said, and I just didn't have any say. I broke through it bit by bit. It almost felt like someone who is paralyzed, and first they can wiggle a finger, and then they can wiggle a hand, and then it just kind of snowballs from there and improves and improves. And that's kind of how it was in a mental sense. I started winning very small victories inside my own head, and then bigger and bigger ones, and I came through it incredibly. I was aware of everything that was happening, being said around me. I remember sitting in the meetings. I remember things that were said to me and about me, and I knew full well that they weren't sure if I was going to snap out of it. Some people just didn't. Snapping out of it isn't really the way I would describe it, though. Like I said, it was a very long war, and it was very hard fought. And even when I got me back, I wasn't okay, not by a long shot. I still would just snap and be angry randomly. Not aggressive, just very, my mood could change like literally every 30 seconds, and I couldn't control that. It's just like a complete shattering of the mind, is what had happened. So once I regained control of myself, then it was about picking up all those little pieces, trying to sift through, files on the shelves of my brain and find, the order they were supposed to be in, because they'd all been shuffled around. It was a bit like that. I couldn't read. That was, an effect of the shattering of my mind. I had always been and am an avid reader. I read every day at that point. And to pick up a book, and I would pick up a book, okay, I'm going to read the first sentence in this book. I would look at it, and I knew I was looking at letters, but it was almost like they would, every time I would try to grab onto them with my mind to process what those letters said, they would just dissipate into mist, and I couldn't, get them into my head to process them, to say, okay, this is the word, this is the word, this is a sentence, this is what it means. It was just impossible. The words would just swim away from me whenever I tried to reach out and grab them. So that was also a very long process. I literally had to learn how to read again. First a letter made sense, then a word, then a sentence, and it went from there. I remember a friend had written me a letter the first week I think I was there, and I got the letter, I had the letter, sitting on my little table that I had in my room, but couldn't read it. And that was my goal. I wanted to read the letter that she had written to me, and that was kind of my practice thing that I used to improve on. I read the first letter. Okay, that's an H. I would try to make note of the second letter. Oh, that was an E. Okay. Hey, Michelle. It says, hey, Michelle. Okay, I'm doing this. But it was like every day I would get another letter. Every week I'd get another word. And then eventually, as I practiced putting those pieces together mentally, the processes that enabled me to read finally adhered together again into one cohesive thing. That's one example of the reading. There are others. I won't go into them all now because this is already 10 minutes. But yeah, a very long fight, but here I am.